So, hi everyone, I'm Kirsty Smith. I'm one of the organisers of the Leeds LGBT Plus Literature Festival, and I'm really happy to say that I'm joined today by Valentina Chiesi. So, for those who don't know, Valentina is the intersex columnist for Diva magazine, the largest lesbian and bi women's magazine in Europe. In 2020 and 2021, their work as an intersex community campaigner was recognised on the Lesbian 100 list, and they're on the Pride Power List 2020 for their intersex-focused work in journalism, media and culture. They're part of Cadillac Collective, Women's Art Collective, and their comic In Out, Gender Through the Brexit Lens has an intersectional focus on their own intersex, lesbian, immigrant, mixed person of colour, working class background. And it's been exhibited and reviewed internationally. And in 2020, Cadillac Anthology Bystander published their new online comic, Being the Good Girl. And as if that wasn't enough, Valentina also founded Intersex Multi-Rights UK. So welcome, Valentina, and thank you so much for being part of the Literature Festival.
Thank you so much, Kirsty. I'm delighted to have been invited. I think it's wonderful, and I'm so glad to be able to take part and to share things with your what would they be called? Your readership or your viewership? I'm not sure how it all works now that we're in virtual spaces. But
it's slightly different, isn't it? We've all had to adapt a little bit being online.
Yeah.
So I was hoping that we could have a couple of kind of quick fire get to know you questions, if that's okay. Hopefully nothing too heavy. So could you remember which piece of LGBTQIA literature was either the first that you ever read or the most memorable that you ever read?
This is quite, because I've always liked all sorts of literature, and like a lot of queer people, we kind of see queerness in, especially sci-fi or superhero things, we kind of see queerness there where I don't know whether it's intended or not. So I guess my first feelings of thinking that I saw some queer literature were, and I didn't actually own comics myself as a child, but if I went to someone's house, usually the brother, not the friend that was the girl that I was friends with, but the brother, and would have comics, and I couldn't wait to go and look at the comics. And I remember reading a Spider-Man comic and feeling that it was in my mind, it felt like a kind of, it was probably a bromance, if you like, but feeling that there was some sort of erotically charged kind of love story going on between Spider-Man and some other character, probably someone he was fighting with, but also, yeah, things like the X-Men comics. So comics were a place where I saw queerness, and also science fiction. I loved reading science fiction, and I saw queerness there. And in other literature, I think a kind of, I guess, kind of, I'm trying to think, in probably, I remember really searching for it as I got a bit older, as a teenager. And I remember reading, I think it's called Wonderground. I can't remember the title. I've even written about it in my column. And that was about a women-run community. I'm sure we can put up a little link to the book, Wonderground, I think it was called. But I remember sort of searching it for more queerness that can possibly have been in it. For one reason or another, it was more about a kind of the possibility of having just the existence of just women, which I thought was fantastic. But I wanted something more, I think. And I always had that experience of wanting more diversity, something more obvious. I didn't want to always have to try to interpret an allusion to something. I wanted it to be more concrete and just to be more just more tangible. And I think that was hard for me growing up. And yeah, I'm just trying to think, when was obviously through, I think, magazines like Diva magazine, which has been going for so many years, I discovered writers like Pat Califia, and that was incredibly tangible writing. So yeah. But what were your books? Did you have a book in mind?
Well, I didn't. I suppose in terms of the first book that I kind of read that actually resonated is something that is it was a book by Georgia Beers, who is a lesbian romance writer, and what kind of affected me about it was more the fact that it just felt real. Rather than it being some kind of, because at the time when I was first looking, I found that I kept coming across lots of sort of erotica and other types of writing, which I enjoy, but it wasn't what I was looking for. And the first book of Georgia Beers that I read, which is actually called Starting from Scratch, nothing fantastical happens. It's just a very simple love story, but it was two women who had very ordinary lives. They had everyday jobs, and they had everyday problems. And it was the first time I'd read something where I went, oh, that could be me, and that could be my friends. And it just felt real. So it felt like more sort of true representation and in a positive way, which was really important. But my answer is definitely not as exciting as yours around Spider-Man and the comics. That was amazing. I love that concept of finding that queerness in everything that you're looking at. I love that. That's great.
Thank you. I think we do look for diversity in what we see, and that's why representation is so important for kids growing up and for young adults as well as for adults. We all need to see it. We all need to see, don't we, our experiences reflected back at us. And that's one of the reasons we still need much more intersex representation in literature, in narrative fiction, but we're still struggling to get as much lesbian literature, I think, as much variety that we need, and also we need it reflected in other cultural spaces, like in TV and film. I don't know why it's taking so long for people to catch up, because we're all here wanting to see it. But another thing I always thought, about superheroes, because is that those analogies where you might have, the X-Men or the New Mutants, all those kind of comics that look at people who have these kind of superpowers and they change, and it usually happens in when they're a teenager, and they suddenly have this power, but it has to be controlled. And then suddenly the state is angry and sends people to destroy them, and they have to band together. And I just thought that kind of is like the queer community. And so, yeah, it does feel like a kind of a metaphor and an analogy even for ways when we're different, ways that we survive and how we come together in our struggle.
Absolutely. And you mentioned there about sort of having that representation and having more sort of visibility around particularly sort of intersex writing, and which kind of brings me back to part of the introduction, which was that you are a Diva columnist. And I've since become more familiar with some of your other works as well, but I first became aware of your writing through the Diva column. And I sort of feel like through the personal experiences that you share, I sort of had felt a real connection to you, which I think is quite an amazing thing to be able to create with someone that you've never met. But I guess that's sort of the power of literature. Could you tell us a little bit about how you became a Diva columnist and how you wanted to use that platform?
Oh, thank you, Kirsty. I'm really grateful to hear your feedback and to know that even through the words of the page, I could connect. I think one of the most important things is communication, and that's really one of the reasons we write. And it isn't one-sided. It really is about connecting on levels of our humanity and feeling bonded and sharing experience, sharing pain, sharing joy, but sharing those feelings and feeling validated and seen. And I feel really moved to hear you talk about the connection you found. And because it's how I feel as well when I read other people's work as well, not all work obviously, but work that somehow has something that touches on elements of our lives. And I'm grateful to have I'm grateful to have that ability as a writer. Some of it, I think I have to acknowledge, I was always in my mind growing up. I knew I was a writer from, I don't know why, from the earliest age when I read books. I was one of those quiet children that just read all the time. And even when I remember we used to have to go back to Italy for family in the summers, and my little suitcase, I didn't put any clothes in it. It was just full of books, because all I wanted to do was read. It really was solace for me, and I just knew that I was a writer, and I used to walk around narrating what was happening as though I was writing a story. Literally, I'd be little person walking around and recounting it as though I was recounting a story, and but giving myself fantastical names. But the thing is, yeah, so partly being a writer was something in me, I think, and partly being a writer has just taken a lot of work, a lot of hard work, a lot of because words are, we'll all say, all writers will acknowledge this, they're messy, tangly things, and they lead you into strange directions that you didn't know you were going to go into as you began. As any of us begin writing, we think we want to write something, and we find ourselves being pulled in so many directions. And so that honing, that trying to pull myself back to the thread of meaning that I intended when I started, that takes layers and layers of work. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it just comes out in a flow, and I'm massively relieved, but also kind of amazed that and feel lucky when that happens. But a lot of the time, it's about honing. It's about editing back and finding that line. And so, knowing that, but then also with my activism, bringing my activism in, I realized that I really, it was really important to me to use my ability to raise awareness for intersex equality rights. I'm a grassroots activist at heart, and equality really matters to me. And I just felt really aware that there was so much more that needed to be done, and I couldn't wait. I think a lot of us that are assigned female and kind of, well, certainly for me, I feel like it was part of that from a cultural perspective, being assigned female in a, my dad was a brown person from an immigrant background, and he had very strong views, very religious about what women could be. And so it took a lot for me to step into a space where I could say, I'm going to write the article that I haven't seen written in that magazine. I'm going to do it. Going back to our initial discussion of representation, I just didn't see it, and I'd feel frustrated, and I'd think, this thing is happening that's really important, but I am not seeing it reflected in my queer literature. I understand it's not reflected in maybe in mainstream media, but please let us at least be talking about this. And it wasn't being, and so it was a combination of that feeling that I wanted to, even though I didn't feel good enough, I felt very motivated. And the other thing was luck, because I did go as a grassroots activist and speak at a lot of events, and I networked a lot to try to gain support for the intersex rights movement. And in that way, I met a fantastic, absolutely wonderful ally called Jane Cieselska, who used to be the editor of Diva magazine. And she was just fantastic. I even at sort of short notice, I'd contact her or message her and say, I have to say this important thing about what's going on in the intersex, intersex activism, or this problem, or why someone's done something, that's harmful to us. And she would just make space for me to be able to publish that in the magazine or online, however I could. And so it started off with little bits like that. And with I think Diva magazine has a history of being inclusive, of looking to support the most marginalized voices, and having really brilliant columnists, giving space to people that, and giving time for them to hone their skills that other magazines might not do. So it was a mixture of those things. And I guess only now, in recent times, do I really feel like, yeah, I really am a columnist, because for a long time I felt like an imposter who had sort of pestered their way in and somehow was getting away with submitting a column every month.
That's really interesting, and it's great that you were able to use that platform, and then to obviously now to have expanded and to be what it is, to have that regular visibility is great. You kind of answered my next question as well, because I was going to say that your column itself feels like activism to me, although sort of portrayed in a very sort of non-confrontational and quite an inviting way. I feel like I often learn quite a lot from that, but without feeling like I'm learning. I don't feel like I'm being sort of sort of in some way kind of preached at or talked at. It feels very much like I'm kind of somehow part of a conversation, which sort of invites you to want to read and learn more, which I really like. So, but I was going to ask the sort of part in which your wider activism sort of that role plays in it, but you've kind of swept that up in there as well. It's clearly a large part, and actually sort of has then, that's what's then led into the column, which is amazing. So
thank you. I just look at me like a school kid raising my hand. But what I was going to, it's so hard to know, isn't it, in Zoom spaces, how to do what we normally would do with a social cue, just by like nodding. But anyway, yeah. What I wanted to say is, from my experience, when we are, as readers, already have goodwill, we aren't the person that needs to be told, if you like. We're the kind of reader who's part of the community in some way, or the wider community, who has goodwill and wishes to learn, or wishes to connect somehow. And then as a reader who felt like that myself, I wanted to make sure that my column knew that my readers are also friends, are also allies, or potential allies, they just don't know it yet. I didn't want to be telling readers off, because I don't think they need to be told off. I think in a magazine like Diva Magazine, we're coming to that magazine because we're looking for queer voices. So I really wanted to make sure that my column was a kind of an act of friendship, if you like, an act of connection, an act of bridge building, and with goodwill and understanding that the reader wouldn't be that different, from me. Obviously there would be some differences, but essentially, would be somebody already wishing to be supportive, and so that's why I'm so glad that you said that about it not feeling kind of preachy or that sort of thing, because I did that really intentionally, because I really thought about I really felt some sort of empathy with I think anyway, I hope, with who was reading it.
Yeah, definitely. I think that it really did hit that tone perfectly. So I thought I might just pick out a couple of extracts from some of the columns that you've done, if that's okay, and then maybe just ask a couple of questions. So in the December column, so we were still in lockdown at that point, and you talked about how your connection to nature, I suppose, grounded you and sort of, gave you joy during what was a really tough time for us all. And towards the end, you said this: so at the beginning of lockdown, I believed I had the emotional resources and practical solutions to cope. In reality, I did not. Instead, I found things very hard to bear. As a disabled intersex person of colour, there were so many challenges that stopped me in my tracks. I felt hopeless and disconnected. But I slowly found new strength in each moment, with each sunrise and each starry night sky. I found my way back to the rhythm of life. I learned that I belong on this planet, we all do. I'd felt deconstructed, but found myself reassembled through moments of joy and connection. And I thought that was really beautifully written, and really important to sort of hear about the challenges that you were facing during that time, but also that I imagine, many people were also, facing, and perhaps not having that outlet or not having that connection to something, and perhaps being able to find that through the words that you were putting on the page. And I really liked that it was something that people could relate to, in actually finding joy in sometimes what can actually be quite simple ways. And I sort of, since then we've had Mental Health Awareness Week, which the theme this year was nature, and I immediately thought of that piece that you'd written, because it was very much around nature, and I sort of thought, wow. And actually, you know, it clearly shows that there is that sort of strong connection there, and it can be so powerful for people. But in terms of being able to write about that, because that's a very personal thing to share, and also, you know, it's a very brave thing to do as well, because we tend to, I think our natural reaction is often to try and sort of bottle up some of those things and not tell people if we're not feeling brilliant. So what sort of gave you the strength to do that? What sort of inspired you to want to put that down in writing?
Wow, that was, I don't know if you saw, but when you read it, I still feel the power of the words, because when we say something out loud and name our feelings, it really is, it feels powerful. And it made me tear up again, because many's the time actually that I'm writing my column and I do find myself tearing up because I'm sharing something that feels very profound to me. But I feel that I hope that I do it with enough care, that I'm gentle with people, and it doesn't give people trauma in any way, even though I'm sharing something that I found traumatic, because I'm trying to share, I guess, there aren't solutions for any of us for our experiences through the pandemic, but there are sharings of feelings, sharings of emotions, where we can just know that we belong and we connect because we are, you know, we exist on this planet together. And I guess it was that, and because I live alone, you know, there was quite a long period of time where it wasn't safe to see anyone, and I couldn't. And so I really needed to feel connection. And I did go through these awful kind of moments where I wasn't sure if I could write, because I wasn't sure what the responsibility was for me as a columnist during a lockdown. And I, you know, in my mind, I could imagine the columnist, you know, who exists somewhere in a fantasy world, who tells us everything that we need to know. But in reality, I had to not have that to compare myself to, because I could never be that. And I had to stop telling myself that I wasn't good enough, you know, because I wasn't that, and start saying, what is going on? What is actually, what am I doing? And I couldn't sleep because I was so stressed. So I had started, on every clear night, I was there looking out of my window at the stars, lucky enough to be able to see the sky, you know, at night from my window. And, you know, every morning, because I'm on a third floor in a block of flats, and I could see the rooftop of the flats opposite me, and I could see the birds on that rooftop, and I would just stare and watch them. And they all, you know, the stars going on about their business. They carried on kind of turning and existing and shining. The planets carried on moving. The sun rose, the sun, you know, set, the moon came up and it went through its cycle. And I watched all of it. And I watched the birds, the different birds, the pigeons, the crows, the jackdaws, you know, I watched them all kind of picking over the moss on the rooftop. And I just thought, they know what to do. They know the basics, that every morning they would preen themselves, they would drink something, they would eat, you know, they would go about and do the things. And it was just, and that helped me stay connected. And that is what I wanted to share. And I also knew that there was not really anything else I could share. I would be, I try to be as authentic as I can. And I think it would have been inauthentic if I had just, I don't know, looked online for what we're meant to do and, you know, put in a package together to kind of share. And so I shared that, and I did wonder, I wondered if it was enough. But I sort of told myself to just trust that if it was helping me, it must, I hope, help others.
Well, it certainly sort of resonated with me, and I really appreciated the way it was written. So I sort of mentioned obviously that kind of that earlier on when I'd said that I'd sort of felt a bit of a connection with you through your writing. And you were just talking then about being able to sort of, you know, put those words out into the ether, even though you're not benefiting necessarily from seeing who's reading your writing. Does the act of itself, is it sometimes quite cathartic? Does it somehow give you a feeling of connection, that you know that people are reading it? Like, how does it feel as the person who put that out there?
I think I didn't know what kind of columnist I would be. We don't know, do we, until we start something, what our voice will be in that context. So I didn't know. So it's happened as I went along. And also the things I write each month are, sometimes there are other things I would like to write that I would like to express, but I feel that there's something so important happening that I'm duty bound to focus on that because it's important to share. And sometimes, you know, with 650 words, which is all I ever have each month, I do struggle sometimes to say, how can I do justice to something I want to talk about in such a small amount of space? Yeah, so with all those kind of parameters that I have, where I am able to share feelings that really matter to me, I don't, it's never me writing and just expunging emotions, because that would be kind of messy and clumsy. Even if I wrote it elegantly, I wouldn't feel, I don't think I'd connect with people. I would just be stating experiences or stating my emotions, but I don't think it would touch people. So I think about making sure I hit the notes of visual imagery, because I think very visually, and I want to give images to people, paint pictures to people, but also visual imagery that tells a story that's also connected with powerful words that mean things to me. So kind of the balance of it. I don't think I always get it right, and every time I do a column I think I could have done that better, but I think it's okay, it's done, and I can't change it because it literally is now printed. I can't tamper with it, which I would do if I was just doing it like privately, I suppose. But the thing is, yeah, I grow from it. I learn who I am from it. I recontextualize experiences that I hadn't thought to put into words. And I feel that some good can come as well from things that have, maybe been painful for me or a struggle, that by sharing them, some good can come from it, and I can create moments of compassion. And that gives me hope. I think sharing kind of compassion I think it's very much rooted in that. And so the good thing for me, I think, is I'm also touched by the compassion I try to give to my work. And I don't know if this sounds I don't know, dramatic or something, but it is actually just how I think. So
I think it's that's sort of what you're trying to achieve. I feel like you are definitely achieving through the column, so that's good. So I was going to just do another excerpt from it was the next one. It's actually from January. I was hoping to find some spread out a little bit, but these were just two that particularly sort of jumped out at me. But I love all of the columns, but this one was shining a light on another sort of really important thing. But you were talking about domestic abuse, and you introduced an online short comic that you'd written, which you did in collaboration with South Asian comic artist Kritika Sasala, called Being the Good Girl, which I've read, and I loved the writing. I also really loved the actual graphics and everything as well. It came together beautifully. But there was something in there that you said, which was so growing up, I was taught to be obedient, to be a good girl. At home, in school, and in social situations, I was taught not to be too loud, not to take up space, not to say no, not to be difficult, and not to make other people feel uncomfortable. But in adulthood, I was expected to seamlessly make the transition in suddenly knowing that I have permission to say no, that I can stand up for myself, even if it makes others uncomfortable. why are we rewarded in childhood for the very qualities that won't protect us as adults? And I found that incredibly powerful. I just wondered if you felt comfortable maybe sharing a little bit with us. I'm not necessarily asking you to share any personal experiences, I wouldn't do that, but I wondered if you would feel comfortable sharing a little bit with us about the actual writing of this and working with Critica and this coming together. Is that something that you would be able to talk about?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I thought, I was a kind of a feminist before I knew, I guess, what feminism was, in that I considered the circumstance I was growing up in and the limitations, and I felt that something was wrong. I didn't feel it was okay. I didn't feel the discrepancy between the way I was treated, as a girl, and the way that boys were treated. I genuinely couldn't understand it. I was a tomboy as well, and so I was frequently wanting to join in or do things and being told that wasn't for me, that wasn't my space, and to keep out of it. Sometimes it was adults who would say that, but sometimes it was the boys. I know a lot of lesbians can be tomboys as well as other people, and as well as trans people as well. There's many of us that can be tomboys, and then grow. I did have these experiences. I felt that for a very long time I wasn't seeing it expressed, or I wasn't being able to read that in literature. If I looked for something on television, or I thought there was a narrative that might reflect some of those things, frequently it would fall into over sentimentality, which I felt uncomfortable with, or it would fall into violence and recreate the trauma of that situation rather than just talk about the stuff of it. And so, and I didn't, what I wanted to do is name the problem, name the stuff that we don't talk about, break it down, deconstruct it and say, it's this, how do you expect us? You train us to be like this. It doesn't happen. I got tired of that narrative that it's natural, women are naturally like this. No, we're not. I thought about all the moments that I was told to sit a certain way, to behave a certain way. Every element was so coerced, and it was, with all of the girls, and it wasn't, this is how it was. And I know there might be some generational difference, between our experiences because of my age, but at the same time, not that much has changed. And I wanted to name it. I wanted to name it that these are unhelpful things to ask of us, that why think that we are so cute and perfect when we do that? Why reward us for that? Don't, because you'll create, the parents that do it, the society that does it is creating problems for us. We have generations of adults who need to retrain themselves, as women, to understand that they're people and they have these rights to take up space in public, to take positions of power. And we all internalize that and stop that from happening. And I know we know this as feminists, but to just name it on a simplistic level and bring it down to these set of things that you do to us as kids don't work as adults, and they're very simple things. And if you just change that, I know 100% I would have spoken up and not stayed in the coercive, abusive relationship that I was in. I wouldn't have done that because I would have known, but I didn't know. And people they always assume that we'll somehow know, but who has that conversation with us? Who? Nobody. It's not like formalized. The behavior that we're kind of formally, that's pedagogically, that's formally imposed upon us, is never formally kind of relinquished. It's never formally said, oh, you can stop doing that now. Now you can enter the world as adults. That never happens. And I make the comparison in my mind to non-consensual surgeries done on children. If we experience non-consensual medical interventions as children because we have intersex bodies which don't match male and female expectations, if our literal physical bodies don't match, medical interventions happen. And I talk about this, and because the medical profession says that we need to have our bodies look, it can't just be that we're assigned female or male at birth, they have to look female or male. Why? Let us have our bodies as they are. But if you go through medical practice growing up where people are telling you what they're going to do with you and you don't have a say in it, you can't say no. They're just saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. At what point do we get that conversation with a doctor or or in a hospital where they say, oh, you're 16 now, or oh, you're 18 now. Now you can tell us if you still want us to continue with these surgeries or these medical interventions, or you still want us to give you these hormones. When do people say, now you have consent? And how can it ever be okay to say we didn't have consent at one point, but suddenly we do now? And then we can retrospectively reconsider whether we were okay with the lack of consent before. And I think consent is so important. It's important for us as children. It's important for us knowing that that's something that is ours to give or not. And if it's at the root of so many problems. And I didn't know I had any agency in this notion of consent. And when we were talking with the Caddock Collective about doing the anthology, which is amazing, so many amazing writers. There's a printed book and then there's the online one. And I really say, to everyone, read these women's fantastic artists, fantastic writers. Read their work, it's amazing. And Kritika Susarla is an amazing artist. And we shared some experience. And so the way we worked is I wrote it as a poem, a piece from my experience, but because we shared intersectionally a similar cultural background, Kritika could then use the story which fitted, whether it be my experience or her experience in Southern Asia. This was a universal story for us as women. And so she used the graphics and images, which were very really embodied a cultural experience of being a young woman in South Asia. And so, so it worked, that we worked very well together, and it was a fantastic project. And I was delighted to do it. And I was also glad that I could write it, because I did used to feel part of me still does, feel ashamed that I didn't know I could say no, that I didn't know that consent was something that I could own as well, and that my feelings, all of us, our well-being has to come first. They might tell us that on an aeroplane about having the oxygen. Why the hell can't they tell us that in school?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can see that sort of comparable that you did there. Absolutely, in terms of consent, it works very much both ways. I think there is this feeling of kind of these sort of feelings around consent being sort of almost sort of institutionalized in people. It kind of gets accepted, doesn't it, that you don't have a say in certain things. I think it's really powerful to be able to talk about that. And I loved that the dynamic between the graphics and the poetry. I thought they fit together really well. That was really good. So thinking, kind of trying to sort of maybe think about sort of coming to a bit of an end, although I could talk to you all day. In terms of things that you've written about, you have we've talked a little bit about sort of a few of the things that you've discussed in your column, but you've covered such a range of things. I mean, very recently you've talked about sort of mixed heritage, light skin privilege, finding belonging. You've talked about other ways that the pandemic has impacted in terms of sort of visibility. There's been so much that you've kind of shared that I think will have resonated with a lot of people, and it's very clear to me that representation and being alive, in particular to intersectionality in writing, is really important to you. And I think you sort of did touch upon this earlier, but I just wanted to kind of come to sort of a close on that question of, why do you think it's so important for representation and intersectionality, particularly in literature, and what impact do you think that it can have?
Wow, that's a really big question as well. It's a really important question. I think on the level, you know, from a personal experience, I needed, when we live in marginalized spaces, we need to see representation and validation in seeing experiences like ours, families like ours, bodies like ours, sexualities, you know, gender identities, all these things. We do need to see them. It feels validating. It helps us also know that if we see someone representing in any platform, any position of, even smallest position of power, that we too could be in that space. If we don't see ourselves in that space, and which we, you know, which is something that so many of us know, if we don't see ourselves in that space, it becomes a kind of narrative that we couldn't possibly exist in that space. So it's a sense of giving the next generation as well a real feeling that they have a chance, a real chance, not just a pipe dream, not just a lottery win dream, but they have a real chance if they're interested in something that they can actually do it, and that it can actually be rewarded, and it could be their life, and it could be something that in the act of it in itself, that is also kind of continuing that important activism of being, of existing. You know, sometimes we talk about just existing being an act of resistance and an act of activism, just being seen, you know, these things, but they are so true. It's the same, you know, for women, for lesbians, for people of color, for people with disability, for people with intersex variations, for Black and brown people, you know, all of us, we need to. And also the other thing is our experiences, all our experiences are valid. But I was thinking, I was having a chat with someone the other day actually about so many things that seem, when I look at them, are oppression, are moments of oppression in my life because of my differences, if you like, or because because of those marginalized spaces. All those moments of oppression have also created in me an understanding. I'm not saying it's good that it happened in any way, but what I know now is I have an understanding of I think it's about seeing someone and seeing their experience and giving them a nod to that, and saying, I see you in my writing. I will see you, not just one person, not just another, but I will see a multitude of you, and your experience, I want you to know I see that, and that you can feel known. We all need witnesses to our lives, and too many of us go through too much of our lives with no witness. And that's something that through the pandemic was really came to the fore. I think it so matters, this notion of being witnesses, but representation, being a witness, connecting, giving people the hope that their lives can be more than prejudice tells them it can be. So yeah, lots of stuff, and there's so much more, but I think hopefully that's enough of an answer.
That was amazing. I absolutely love that we all need witnesses in our lives. I think that is that's a really lovely way to end an interview, actually. We all need witnesses, and sort of, it's, for me, it's been really nice to sort of be able to explore a little bit more about you and your writing, and to also be able to, you know, ask a few questions around some of the pieces that have meant quite a lot to me. So thank you very much for spending the time today with us to go through that. And I'll definitely be looking forward to reading the next column.
Thank you. Oh, and I would be remiss if I didn't in this last moment say that as part of my activism, because I'm an artist as well, I have redesigned the Pride Progress flag to include the intersex flag, and I've been sharing it from our Instagram account. The Intersex Equality Rights UK has an Instagram account. We've been sharing the graphics so that people can use that Pride flag. We shared it, of course, with your organisation, Kirsty, and you were wonderful to support us and share the image of the Pride Progress flag, which now includes the intersex flag. And so, yeah, it's joyful. We're sharing it freely. Message us on Instagram, and we'll share the graphics with you so you can use them in your posts. And we've even got a high resolution graphic that we're happy to share with you, that you can get printed into a real life flag if you wish.
Oh, brilliant.
Yes. Thank you. And I must say, I have absolutely loved having this opportunity to talk about my column in this way. I'm really grateful to you, Kirsty, because it really matters. I really appreciate these conversations. We've had, like, obviously leading up to this, we had some fantastic conversation, and it really meant something to me. And I hope we can do more things together for this festival, but also, yeah, I just wanted to let you share my appreciation as well. But it's been really, really good. And I don't know, I'm just silly now, gushy, but yeah, I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Oh no, well, thanks for saying that. I'm glad that it's been a positive experience. That's great.
Yes.
Super.